average rate.
Order. It being 2:30 p.m, the debate is interrupted in accordance with the resolution agreed to earlier. I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As honourable members are aware, last night I was elected Leader of the Parliamentary Liberal Party, and I have been subsequently sworn in as Prime Minister by the Governor-General today. The Foreign Minister, the Honourable Julie Bishop, has also been re-elected as the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party. I can confirm that the Leader of the Nationals has confirmed the support of the Nationals in the formation of a coalition government under my leadership, and I table for the information of the House a document reflecting the changed ministerial arrangements and seek leave to have the document incorporated into Hansard.
Is leave granted?
Is leave granted? You're meant to say yes. Or someone's meant to.
I need to be asked by the
Member
Speaker.
for Watson.
The Speaker will ask. He runs the Parliament.
Member for Watson, is leave granted?
Leave's granted.
Thank the member for Watson. Call the Prime Minister.
The
Prime Minister will continue.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I inform the House that the Assistant Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development will be absent from question time today. The Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development will take questions on his behalf. Now, with your indulgence, Mr Speaker, and the indulgence of the House, I want to make some remarks on the former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. Our nation, our parliament, our government, our parties, the coalition, owe Tony Abbott an enormous debt of gratitude for his leadership and his service over many, many years. He led us out of opposition back into government. The challenges of leadership are very considerable. The pressures are enormous. And as Tony Abbott has often said himself, very, very profoundly, that all of us here are volunteers. It is our families that are conscripts. And so we should acknowledge today, of course, the debt we also owe to his wife Margie and their daughters. Tony has discharged his role as Prime Minister, indeed as Leader of the Opposition, with enormous distinction and achievement. The free trade agreements alone, which have been negotiated under his leadership, represent some of the most significant foundations for our future prosperity. And of course, under his leadership, our government restored the integrity of our borders, with the consequence that we have been enabled to make the increased and very generous arrangements for Syrian refugees last week. Mr Speaker, we owe a great debt to Tony Abbott. We thank him for his leadership. We thank him for his service. He is a great Australian, and our country has been better, has been improved, has been better led under his time as Prime Minister.
Thank the Prime Minister. The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I too want to add my remarks to the events and the departure of Mr Abbott as Prime Minister. Politics is a privilege to serve here. It is a vocation. But as we know, it can be very hard as well. Now, it is part of the Australian spirit not to score points when someone is down. So I just want to say that public life is hard on people who serve, and it's hard on their families. It is not for me to be partisan about Mr Abbott's record, but he certainly had led the Liberal Party formidably for well in excess of 5 years. He is a fierce proponent of his views, a formidable proponent of his views, a ruthless advocate for what he believes in. From his first victory in 2009 to become the Leader of the Liberal Party, right through to last night, he is a fighter, a formidable fighter. I have exchanged harsh words with him in my time as opposition leader. I've disagreed with his politics and decisions on many occasions. But I also wish to record that he had this frustrating ability on occasion, just when you were really frustrated with a particular decision he might have made, to do something unexpected and generous and personal. From the time when my mother passed, he was very sensitive to that. I said this to him, but he also said, and I explained this conundrum of his frustrating behaviour, he just smiled at me and said, "I'm sure I'll frustrate you again." And he did. It's a very tough day for Mr Abbott. I say to him, to Margie, to his remarkable daughters, that we wish you well. To Mr Abbott's personal staff, led by the formidable Peter Credlin, you've served the boss loyally and according to your code, and we recognise this. And in conclusion, I just say to Mr Abbott, I had the privilege of, on several occasions, being with you when we would address serving men and women of our Defence Forces. And what I thought was remarkably humble of the member for Warringah is he would frequently introduce his remarks to them and say, "I've never served." And he was conscious, I think, of this, even disproportionately. And what I say to Mr Abbott is, you have served. I don't think you need to judge yourself any less for not having actually worn the uniform of this country. You have represented and been the Prime Minister of this country. That is service indeed.
The Leader of the Opposition. The Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, thank you. May I just briefly add my warm regards to the member for Warringah, Tony Abbott, on his term as Prime Minister of this country. It was a very great pleasure to serve with him for all of his 5 years as Leader of the Liberal Party. He certainly had a vision for Australia. He had a particular interest in promoting infrastructure and wanted to be known as the Infrastructure Prime Minister. And so it was perhaps easy to be Minister for Infrastructure when there was such a strong level of support from the Prime Minister. And while his term as Prime Minister was relatively short, I was pleased that he did get to open one or two projects, some of which I acknowledge had been inherited from the previous government, because building big projects these days takes a long time, but so many new ones have been started, and that will be a part of his legacy to his country. I also want to acknowledge Margie. Lynn and I enjoyed our relationship with the Abbotts as a couple, and appreciated the tremendous sacrifice that the family makes in these kinds of positions. Particularly Margie, who wasn't a particularly political person and I think was happier doing other things, she was very supportive of Tony through all of that period. In his relaxation time, he did the most extraordinary things, like ride a bike faster than most people in this country for longer than most people in this country. I suspect the AFP might be a bit relieved to have somebody who's a bit slower runner, and sorry Malcolm, but a bit slower runner,
No doubt.
a bit slower bike rider,
And a larger target.
that the predecessor, who usually took two teams to keep up with, and was able, when he travelled around the world, to train and ride with sort of some of the fastest people in the country. But in addition to that, his hobbies like being involved with the local fire brigade, volunteer fire brigade, life-saving, etc., really marked him as a true Australian who's made a wonderful contribution to the nation now as Prime Minister. So I wish them every success and happiness for whatever the future may hold. We very much value the privilege of having worked with him.
The Deputy Prime Minister. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Just on indulgence first.
On indulgence.
Mr Speaker, I congratulate Mr Turnbull on being chosen by his Liberal Party to become Prime Minister of Australia. It is a signal honour. It is one which is afforded to very few Australians. You have sought an active role in public life, and this is the highest position which could be awarded, and we congratulate you from the Labor side. We also recognise that you have a unique opportunity to make this country more modern, more adaptive, more responsible. It may be a genuine chance for this nation, and this chance isn't defined by yourself or myself. but in fact by the policies, your policies, Labor's policies, what we can do for this country. That's the real test. For us, it'll be about the ideas you put forward and the ideas we put forward. A genuine choice, a genuine chance for this country. And it'll be up for this country between now and the next election to select who has the best ideas to advance Australia. Thank you.
Questions without notice.
Thank you for that indulgence, Mr. Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. In June 2014, when asked if he supported the government's first budget, the now Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I support unreservedly and wholeheartedly every element in the budget, every single one." Will the Prime Minister change the substance of this government, or is it just about its style?
I call the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. The honourable member would be very aware, the Leader of the Opposition would be very well aware, that we operate a cabinet system of government in Australia, and every member of the cabinet supports the cabinet's decisions, and all of the cabinet supported that budget.
Member
And
for Gorton.
when the Leader of the
Member for
Opposition
Gorton will cease interjecting.
invites me to sit here and unilaterally disown one policy or another, he demonstrates that he fails to understand that a cabinet government is a collective method of making decisions. We are a cabinet government. I will lead a traditional cabinet government, and policies will change in the light of changed conditions. Of course they will. They will change all the time. They have to. They have to under any government. But we stand by every decision we make. The cabinet stands by every decision we make, and as we revise them and improve them in the light of experience, we'll stand by those too. So the honourable member is inviting me to make a unilateral decision, and he should not be surprised to be disappointed.
I call the member for Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and can I heartily congratulate him on his becoming this great nation's 29th Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister update the House on the challenges the government faces in ensuring jobs and growth for the future? And how is this government moving to overcome these challenges?
Member for Jagga will cease interjecting. I call the Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for a question and for congratulations. Mr. Speaker, we are living in the most exciting times to be an Australian. The opportunities and challenges of a rapidly globalising economy are remarkable. The rate of economic and technological change is utterly without precedent. And so an Australia which succeeds in remaining a high-wage, generous social welfare net economy, which should be our goal, must be agile, it must be dynamic, it must be looking to the future. We cannot look back to the past. We have to be always on the front foot. And we know that unless we want to live in the darkness of fear that the opposition seeks to throw us into, frightening people about the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement, for example, trying to scare people and failing to recognise that that agreement alone is one of the most important foundations for our future prosperity. Now, we know that our future lies in technology, it lies in science, it lies in all of the new industries, it lies in the future. And let me give you, Mr. Speaker, some examples. Let me give you some examples. China's rapid urbanisation has led to 80 Australian architectural studios opening up in China, with a further 220 Australian firms winning work. A good example is Cox Rayner Architects, which recently won a competition to design China's $290 million National Maritime Museum. beating a field of 80 of the world's leading design firms in Tianjin. These are the types of opportunities the Leader of the Opposition would deny us. This is the type of market, this gigantic market, the largest in the world, which the Leader of the Opposition, in his efforts to frighten Australians, would seek to have closed to us. Mr. Speaker, we know that this coming election next year will be won by the party that is able to embrace the future, able to envision and explain the future, able to set out the means and the roadmap to ensure that Australians do not need to talk about being future-proofed, that Australians will understand that the future for us is formidable. The future is one of great opportunities, and that requires confidence and leadership, and it will be lost if we embrace the politics of fear and scaremongering of which the Leader of the Opposition is so fond.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. In June 2014, when asked if he supported the government's first budget, the now Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I support the reforms to higher education." Given the Prime Minister was part of a cabinet that supported it and voted for it in the parliament, does the Prime Minister still support forcing Australians to pay for $100,000 degrees, and will the Prime Minister change the substance of the government or just the style?
Members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Corangamite. Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition's question, but I think he's got his pack mixed up because it sounds almost entirely the same as the first one he asked. The reality is, as he knows, that we support all of our policies and all of our measures.
The member for Jagger is warned.
And it's open to the Leader of the Opposition to criticise them. He can use the procedures of the House to do so. But he would be better served by asking, if he wants to inquire into the education policies of the government, perhaps he should address his question to the Minister for Education for a greater level of detail.
Members on my left will cease interjecting. Member for McMahon will cease interjecting. The member for Hunter is warned. The member for Fisher has the call.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, will you update the House on what steps the government is taking to keep and maintain a safe and secure nation?
The Prime Minister.
Yes. I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr. Speaker, my first briefing as Prime Minister-designate today was with the Director of Security.
Member for Wakefield.
There is no more important obligation or duty on any government than protecting the safety of the people. We are committed as a government to ensuring that our borders are secure and to getting the balance right as we counter extremism at home and abroad. These are very, very complex challenges, and we focus on them relentlessly. Now, we are a vastly more open and interconnected nation in the world than we have ever been before. Technology, which has brought with it so many benefits, also brings new challenges. As the tragic events, the MH17 and the acts of brutal violence, terrorism in the Middle East remind us so regularly, we are no longer a country far away from the problems of the world. Terrible scenes, terrible incidents occur or are seen on our television screens and social media, and of course can confront us here at home. As I speak today, members of the ADF are in the Middle East, putting themselves in harm's way to stop the spread of a violent ideology. As honourable members know, the government announced on the 9th of September its decision to extend our air operations to target Daesh in Syria, and we also announced an additional $44 million in humanitarian assistance for people displaced due to the fighting in Iraq and Syria. That assistance will support more than 240,000 Syrians and Iraqis forced to flee their homes or seek refuge in neighbouring countries. Mr. Speaker, in no small part, because we have been successful in securing our borders, we can play our part in helping resettle an additional 12,000 refugees from Syria and Iraq. That is over and above the regular humanitarian program of 13,750 refugees who will be resettled as soon as possible. We are conducting a review of our defence forces via a white paper due out later this year, which will help define our key national priorities. But countering violent extremism also begins at home, and we are working with social media companies and communities in countering the spread of extremist ideas. Mr Speaker, the defence of Australia and its people is the single most important duty of this government, and we remain focused on that mission now as we have always been.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Does the Treasurer agree with the statement by the now Prime Minister yesterday, and I quote, "It is clear enough that the government is not successful in providing the economic leadership we need"?
I call the Treasurer. Member for McEwen.
I thank the honourable member for McMahon for the question. Entirely unpredictable, of course. Entirely unpredictable. The honourable member for Wentworth is perfectly entitled to make a statement, as he did yesterday, about how we can do better. And you know what? We can always do better. We can always do better. But I tell you what, we're doing a hell of a lot better than the Labor Party. We're doing a hell of a lot better than the Labor Party. Because when the Labor Party left office,
Member for Wells.
only 2,000 jobs a month were being created in Australia. And at the moment, 21,000 jobs a month. 21,000 jobs a month. When Labor left office, they left a $48 billion deficit.
Member for Rankin will cease interjecting.
We're getting that down to around $35 billion and getting it back on a credible path to surplus. We have reduced expenditure that Labor left behind by $50 billion. $50 billion. And along the way, we've had to make some incredibly difficult decisions about the size of the public service and reducing the number of quangos and committees and inquiries and so on that were undertaken by the previous government. But ultimately, it comes down to the prosperity of the Australian people. And the economy today is $68 billion bigger than the economy that we inherited from the Labor Party. In relation to business surveys, I note that the National Australia Bank monthly business survey, business confidence has always been in positive territory since we've been in government, currently sits at +1. In Labor's last year of government, business confidence was negative throughout the year. Negative throughout the year, and it's been up under us ever since we were elected. The same NAB business survey says business trading conditions sit at +20, the second highest level in over 7 years. And Dun & Bradstreet noted just a fortnight ago, quote, "We're seeing robust levels of optimism across all sectors in the Australian business community." Now, I would be the first to say that we can always do better, because on this side of the parliament we aspire to do the very best by the Australian people. But everything we do and everything we have done has been a hell of a lot better than a very bad Labor government.
I call the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and congratulations on becoming Australia's Prime Minister. Many people hope that it means a change of direction for the country, and you've said that we need leadership that respects people's intelligence and explains complex issues. So my question is, does this include climate change? Are you beholden to the hardliners in your ranks, meaning you'll stick with pollution targets that fudge the science? Or will you explain and persuade that the science requires much deeper pollution cuts than the Abbott government had proposed?
Member for Herbert will cease interjecting. I call the Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question. The cuts proposed by the government, which are being taken by the Foreign Minister and the Environment Minister to the Paris Conference of the Parties, are very substantial ones, and they are in line with cuts proposed by comparable economies. Honourable member, what are the cuts the Labor Party proposes? The Leader of the Opposition, perhaps. What is the Leader of the Opposition's proposal? behind the Leader of the Opposition are people we're proposing 26 to 28% cuts.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Melbourne on a point of order.
On relevance, I didn't ask about
the member for Melbourne will resume his seat. The Prime Minister is relevant to the question. The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the honourable member for his question. The cuts that we are proposing
the member for Wakefield has been warned.
Absolutely comparable and appropriate to in line with other comparable economies. They are very substantial cuts. The means that we are using, that the Minister for the Environment has diligently and carefully put in place to achieve them, are doing their work. And I can just give the honourable member an example. The first emissions reduction fund auction in April 2015 was a resounding success. 47 million tonnes of emissions contracted, the largest ever emissions reduction commitment by business. The average price at the auction was $13.95 per tonne of carbon dioxide reduction. So these methods, or this plan, this reduction fund, is actually working. Now, the honourable member, I know, and I know some members of the Labor Party make the same mistake. They make the mistake of turning everything related to climate policy into ideology. The objective is to lower emissions. There are many means of cutting emissions, some more complex than others, some more expensive than others. There is no inherent virtue in any particular method of cutting emissions. There is no ideology there. The only thing that matters is the outcome. The targets we have set are reasonable ones. They are comparable ones. They are substantial ones. The methods that the Environment Minister has put in place to achieve those cuts are working. It works, it's doing the job, the cuts are the right level, and so with great respect to the honourable member and recognising his strong interest in the matter, the government's policy on climate is right and it is being proved right.
I call the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Regional Development. Will the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on action the government is taking to build the infrastructure needed to support jobs and growth in Western Australia?
I call the Deputy Prime Minister. Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan for the question. Western Australia is certainly a winner with this government's infrastructure program. We have a large number of very important projects being undertaken in Western Australia, worth about $5.4 billion in all, and they will be transformational for Perth, but also make significant upgradings to the state's rural highway network. Of course, the funding includes the $116 million allocated for the duplication of the Armidale Road over the last few days, and of course our commitments to projects like the Perth Freight Link, a $925 million project, also $894 million to Northlink WA and $676 million to Gateway Western Australia. So these are important projects, and I think they'll make a real difference to Western Australia and particularly to Perth and the way in which traffic flows around that region. And of course, these projects are fully funded. They're fully funded. Now, Labor, when they were last in office, of course, claimed credit for some of these particular programs and boasted, particularly the member for Grainler, who's not with us today, but the member for Grainler.
I remind the member for Chifley's been warned.
These were
member for Chifley has
projects.
been warned twice.
Except the problem for him was that the member for Lilly, when he was Treasurer, he made it absolutely clear that these projects weren't in fact funded, because he said that revenue from the mining resource tax goes to investment in infrastructure projects like the Gateway project in Western Australia around the airport. That's what it's all about. If we don't have the revenue from the tax, then we can't make the investments. And of course, how much revenue did they get from the tax? Zero. Zero. So Labor, in fact, was funding these projects with money that didn't exist, and the Treasurer knew that it didn't exist. The projects were simply not funded. From our perspective, we've got the projects working, we've got them under construction, we've got them advancing and delivering jobs and opportunities in Western Australia, and they're paid for. And they're paid for. And that's the difference between a government that believes in sound economic management and those who believe that you can build things with monopoly money that you never brought to account.
Before I call the member for Port Adelaide, I wish to inform the House that we have present in the gallery this afternoon the former member for Robertson, the Honourable Jim Lloyd. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome. Thank you. The member for Port Adelaide.
No, you don't.
Member for Port Adelaide will ask his question or resume his seat.
My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to the Prime Minister's previous answer and to reports that the Prime Minister will retain the previous Prime Minister's direct action plan. Given that the Prime Minister has previously said that direct action was, and I quote, a recipe for fiscal recklessness on a grand scale, how can Australians believe a word this Prime Minister says?
Member for Kingston will cease interjecting. Prime Minister has the floor.
I thank the honourable member for his question, Mr. Speaker. One would have hoped that the opposition could do better than this. The reality is, as the honourable member should know,
has already been warned
that the Environment Minister's emissions reduction fund is capped. It has a cap. It cannot result in an unlimited amount of fiscal commitment. There is a clear financial commitment to it.
Member for Hotham.
The policy that we have in place is very clearly costed and calibrated, and it is affecting reductions in emissions now and at a very low cost. The honourable member doesn't like it.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The member for Charlton.
Relevant, Mr. Speaker. To be relevant,
there's no point of order. The member for Charlton will resume his seat. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the honourable member fails to you can't take people's remarks about different proposals years ago. The fact is, well, honourable members can scoff. Honourable members can scoff. The fact is that we have a set of very different measures today. The Emissions Reduction Fund is a set of very specific measures which deal with reducing carbon emissions, and they are doing so at a low cost. We are not talking about a theoretical measure. We're talking about a very specific policy that was carefully put together by the Minister for the Environment, that was carefully considered by the government, and it is working. And what honourable members hate most is that it is actually working. The honourable members would like to say that the Environment Minister's policy may work in practice, but it fails in theory. The reality is, if it works in practice, it works. If it cuts emissions, it does the job. The objective is not the means. The objective is not the means. The objective is the goal. And what sticks in their craw, Mr. Speaker, what they can't bear is that the Minister for the Environment is reducing emissions at a remarkably low cost.
I'll remind the member
and that
for
is
Charlton,
a great credit to
warned.
him and a great credit to the government. But it offends the opposition's prejudices. It offends their preconceived notions. It offends their ridiculous ideology about climate change, where every measure is turned into an article of principle. It doesn't matter how you cut emissions as long as they are cut. And the Minister for the Environment and this government is cutting emissions. Our goal is reasonable, it's responsible, and it's comparable to other countries similarly situated.
Before I call the member for Ryan, members will cease interjecting. I'm addressing the House. Before I call the member for Ryan, the member for Charlton was warned twice. He continued to interject repeatedly through the answer. He will leave under 94A. And a final warning to those members who have been warned. I call the member for Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer please update the House on the state of the economy, and what actions has the government taken to strengthen the economy and create more jobs?
I call the Treasurer.
Well, I thank the honourable member for Ryan for her question. I really do. The Australian economy is going through a significant transition as we move from the mining construction phase into the mining production phase. Mining represents, as I've said many times in this place, around 10% of GDP, 10% of the economy, 55% of our exports. And the biggest part of our economy is services, health services, education services, financial services. They represent around 70% of our economy, 80% of our jobs and just 17% of our exports. So what can we do to create more jobs? Because when Labor was last in government, they were creating jobs at around 2,000 a month. We're creating jobs at around 20,000 a month. What can we do that helps in that regard? And the starting point is to get rid of Labor's taxes. So we have already got rid of the carbon tax, Labor's carbon tax, which was a handbrake on the Australian economy. We got rid of Labor's mining tax, which was a disincentive in mining investment. We got rid of Labor's piggy bank tax, where they were raiding every piggy bank that wasn't used for a certain period of time. We got rid of Labor's bank deposit tax, which was going to apply to everyone that had a savings account, and significantly we got rid of Labor's FBT car tax, which they were going to apply to everyone who is basically in the charitable industry that was relying on a motor vehicle supplied by their employer. So we got rid of those 5 Labor taxes, which is significant microeconomic reform in its own regard. But we also inherited 96 taxes that were announced but unlegislated by Labor, and we dealt with all of those as well. I can report to the House that after negotiations of the G20 with George Osborne, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and other members of the G20 in Turkey a fortnight ago, tomorrow I'll be introducing into this parliament the multinational anti-avoidance law, which is the first and foremost law of its kind in the world to go after multinationals that are not paying their fair share of tax. And we are ensuring, after having had ATO, Taxation Office personnel, lodged in 30 multinational companies, we are now going to those companies, identifying what their profits are and saying that they have to pay their fair share of tax in Australia. This is world-class and world-leading legislation. We have worked with the OECD. I've worked with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and we've worked through the G20 to deliver this world-class leading legislation that ensures that the multinationals making big profits in Australia pay their fair share of tax in Australia.
I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My questions to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm the accuracy of the Treasurer's statement about the Prime Minister yesterday, that he, and I quote, has never said to me or to the Cabinet that we are heading in the wrong economic direction?
The Leader of the House. Leader of the House. Members on my left will cease interjecting.
Prime Minister, Mr Speaker, I'm not sure that that is within the Prime Minister's responsibilities, and nor am I sure that the opposition
Leader
can
of the
ask
House
about.
Will resume his seat. The member for the Leader of the House will resume his seat. The member for Sydney will cease interjecting. The member for Sydney repeatedly interjects when I'm trying to hear a point of order. It's highly disorderly. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, that question offends a number of sections of the standing order. One, it's obviously hypothetical, and clearly it's not within the Prime Minister's responsibilities what the Treasurer ever thought or said.
The member for Lingiari will cease interjecting, as will the member for Isaacs, and whoever else is interjecting behind the member for Watson, who you're blocking their view. Yeah, that would be handy. Actually, just step back a bit. The member for Watson.
Okay. On the point of order, it has to be in order for the opposition to ask a new Prime Minister whether or not he believes Australia is heading in the wrong economic direction. That has to be in order. And if you want it reframed without the quote, the rephrase can be asked. But it has always been allowed
the Leader of the
that people's
House,
own
Leader of the
quotes
House
could
will
be
resume
brought back to them.
Leader of the House will
Has
resume his
always
seat. The
been
member
in
for
order.
Watson will resume his seat. Having listened to the question and listened to the member for Watson, I'm going to give an opportunity to rephrase the question. As it was worded originally, it does offend the standing orders the Leader of the House referred to. The Leader of the Opposition.
Now, my questions to the Prime Minister. Did the Prime Minister ever tell the Treasurer that he thought, that is, Mr Turnbull thought, that Australia was heading in the wrong economic direction?
No, I'm sorry. No, the Leader of the House can resume his seat. I'll go to the next question. It hasn't been rephrased adequately. No, the member for Watson. Yes, the member for Watson.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. We had a change of Prime Minister yesterday on the basis of this argument, on the basis of the economic direction of
The
Australia.
member for Watson,
we have to be allowed to get an answer to that question.
The member for Watson himself articulated the question that would be in order if it were rephrased, and it hasn't been rephrased adequately. I'm going to move to the next question. I'm happy to give the opportunity during the 3 minutes that we've got to rephrase the question. I call the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Will the minister update the House on how the government is supporting small businesses in my electorate of Hasluck and elsewhere?
I call the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Hasluck. His 10,700 small businesses, I actually feel like I've met most of them from the visits that we've had over there and the small business forums and the interactions that we've had organised by the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And what's come through from all of those meetings is just how welcomed and encouraging the small business community is about the action we're taking to support their enterprise. The Treasurer's outlined the transition in the economy and the challenges that are there, and a renaissance in entrepreneurship, support for small business men and women, getting behind the family and farming enterprises of our nation and of our economy is at the heart of our agenda, not only to grow jobs and to grow the economy, but to recover the jobs lost under Labor. We lost nearly 500,000 jobs in small business under Labor. In fact, over that period of Labor government, fewer small businesses ended up employing people at the end of it than they were at the beginning. So our focus is on making sure the environment is right for small businesses and enterprising men and women to thrive and prosper in this economy, getting those conditions right to drive growth and job creation, putting the incentives in place to encourage dynamism in the economy, agility, entrepreneurship, a preparedness to compete and invest, and we are getting there. We are making gains, and this deserves to be recognised and is of great encouragement to small businesses right across our economy. Retail sales are up, exports are up, housing approvals are up, residential dwelling construction. This is actually homes being built is some 23% higher than the rate of housing construction when Labor was last in office. Personal bankruptcies are down to a 20-year low. We're seeing investment right across all sectors of the economy, and the signs are very encouraging for the future. In the member's own electorate, when I meet with these local small business people, they tell me that there is a positivity in the air and an optimism. Eddie Peters from the Honda shop in Midland, he talks about the great budget package, those initiatives of tax cuts and incentives with asset write-offs that have not only benefited his business directly, but also many of his customers, tradespeople, primary industry producers. They've all seen a lift in their opportunity and encouragement for their entrepreneurship. Now, we've got more work to do. Jobs growth is there, and small businesses are providing about half of those new jobs in our economy. We've seen the small business share of the private sector workforce actually increase, but there's more happening. The employee share schemes that we've repaired, given Labor had messed that up and harmed that initiative. The technological engagement that I've enjoyed working closely with the Prime Minister on. Crowdsource equity funding, the shared passion we have to see the start-up community and the entrepreneurial culture in our economy thrive and prosper. That's our plan for the future. We've been getting on with the job. We are delivering results. The signs are positive. We've got more work to do. That's about giving small business men and women the support and respect they deserve. That's what this government's doing.
Before I call the member for McMahon, I inform the House that we have present in the gallery this afternoon former member of this House, the Honourable Tom Hughes QC, also former Attorney-General. On behalf of the House, I extend a warm welcome. The member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Does the Treasurer stand by his statement of yesterday in relation to the now Prime Minister? And I quote, "He's never said to me or the Cabinet that we're heading in the wrong economic direction." Does the Treasurer agree with the Prime Minister?
I call the Treasurer.
Well, that's right. They're verbling again, the Labor Party, and this is familiar territory for them. Australia is heading in the right economic direction, but we've still got work to do. Correct. We've still got work to do. There's no suggestion that it's mission accomplished. There's so much more work to be done. And on the coalition side, we will not give up until the job is complete. And we're a very long way from completion point. We still have a tax reform process to prepare the taxation system for the 21st century. We've received 850 submissions in relation to taxation white paper. It has been coalition policy to fix the federation, to work with the states in a constructive way, to get rid of the duplication. That's hugely important, and I'm sure the new Prime Minister will take up that with great relish, trying to fix the federation. It is also the case that we are rolling out the biggest infrastructure program in Australia's history. More than $50 billion in new, additional productive infrastructure that is going to deliver $130 billion of new projects, backed by the single most significant microeconomic reform in recent years, which is the asset recycling program. And if you look at, for example, Sydney, where you have a premier in that state that is willing to work with the federal government, today there are 75 registered cranes in the middle of the Sydney CBD, 165 within a kilometre around that CBD. And that is because you've got a premier that is engaging with the Commonwealth Government on an asset recycling program where, if he sells assets such as poles and wires and uses the proceeds to go into new infrastructure, we provide a 15% bonus to the state to help them with that new infrastructure. That's why you get 160-odd new cranes within 1 kilometre of a CBD like New South Wales. And we hope that the rest of Australia takes that up as well. There are many areas to continue the reform. Budget reform is absolutely essential. There's still $18 billion of savings held up. We've already delivered $50 billion of savings. That's hugely important. Helps to improve the budget bottom line. But there is more work to be done. And the one significant initiative that Labor could support immediately to help to create jobs, to build a stronger economy, would be to back the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. The Labor Party can no longer sit on the fence about this. This is about jobs and better-paying jobs for Australian workers, and they should immediately back the initiatives that the coalition government has put in place to strengthen the Australian economy, such as the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement.
The member for Forrest.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister advise the House how the free trade agreements with China, Japan and Korea will help increase economic prosperity in Western Australia? Are there any threats to the realisation of these benefits?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Forrest for her question. And as she well knows, the 3 free trade agreements with China, Japan and Korea are critical for the Western Australian economy and therefore the Australian economy. Almost 80% of Western Australia's exports are destined for these 3 markets. And we want to grow our trade because it means more jobs and it means more opportunities for West Australians. It means more opportunities for Australians and higher standards of living for all. And so the West Australian economy has had a long and prosperous relationship with our North Asian trading partners. In fact, it was through decades of strong trade with Japan that Western Australia built its iron ore and oil and gas industries. And South Korea has played a significant role in Western Australia's prosperity, consistently appearing as one of our top 5 export markets for 2 decades. So China, which already accounts for more than half of all exports from Western Australia offers significant opportunities for the West across diverse industries and sectors, from resources to agriculture to wine to services. So Western Australian businesses and workers will stand to benefit from this free trade agreement with China. Now, Wines of WA Chief Executive Larry Jorgensen says the China Free Trade Agreement means that, quote, "We are on the pathway towards having a level playing field in China with regard to our international competitors." The CEO of WA's Fishing Industry Council, John Harrison, said the agreement was a real game changer, stating that free trade agreements with other Asian countries had, quote, "greatly stimulated domestic job creation and opportunities for Western Australian businesses." That was WA Chamber of Commerce and Industry CEO Deirdre Wilmot. And she said WA's manufacturing, agriculture, food and service industries stand to benefit greatly from the agreement. But what is really exciting for us is our creative economy, and Western Australia is the exemplar. We boast talented designers and architects and fashion designers, graphic, industrial. We've got engineers, those in the IT industry, researchers. All have new and enhanced opportunities to sell their services into China. We have among the most innovative and creative and entrepreneurial talent in the world, and now they're being given access to one of the largest markets in the world. So, Mr Speaker, what I can't understand is why Labor is doing everything it can to prevent Western Australians and Australians from reaping the benefit of this free trade agreement. The Leader of the Opposition is showing that he puts the interests of the union bosses ahead of the interests of Western Australian workers. His readiness to sell down Western Australia's future economic prosperity should send a shiver down the spine of every Western Australian worker whose job depends on selling goods and services to our North Asian partners. It's time for Labor to back the jobs of Western Australians, back the free trade agreement.
Call the member for Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A private member's bill on marriage equality moved by the member for Leichhardt is currently before the House. It would take half an hour of parliamentary time to allow this bill to be voted on. It could be done tomorrow. Will the Prime Minister allow a vote on this bill and allow members of his party a free vote, as he's publicly called for previously?
Hear, hear. Call the Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the honourable member for her question, and I respect her interest, a very deep interest in this issue. The marriage equality or same-sex marriage issue is a very significant one, and a one on which people of good faith, the best faith, honestly have different opinions, both on the honourable member's side of the House and on our side of the House. Historically, this issue has been resolved. Issues of this type have been resolved in Parliament by free votes, and the honourable member is correct in referring to that. Another way of dealing with this is by a vote of the people. And the coalition, our government, has decided that the resolution of this matter will be determined by a vote of the people, all the people, via a plebiscite to be held after the next election. Now, the honourable member, the honourable member, I hear the honourable member for Isaacs call it a sellout, and again it underlines. It underlines
member for McEwen.
the utter failure of the opposition to approach issues other than in a thoroughly ideological way. The object is to ensure that Australians, either through their representatives or directly, can make an honest, conscientious decision. Our government, our party room, has decided that the decision will be taken by a plebiscite. Why is the opposition afraid of the people having a vote? Why don't they want all Australians having a vote? There is no greater virtue in a free vote here or a plebiscite. They are each means of resolving the matter. One, I grant you, is more expensive, but nonetheless, it is a very legitimate and democratic way of dealing with it. Now, that is what we have resolved. Now, let me say this, Mr Speaker. At the next election, Australians will have a choice.
Ballarat is warned.
The Labor Party will say, vote for us, and marriage equality will be dealt with by the politicians, by the parliament, in a free vote after the election. And we will say, if we are re-elected to government, every single Australian will have a say. Every single Australian.
The member for Kingston.
We all respect members of parliament. After all, we are all members of parliament. But we are just representatives. We're 150 in number. Every single Australian will have a vote on the issue after the next election if we are returned to government. And how can the opposition seriously, credibly say that is anything other than thoroughly democratic? When did it cease to be democratic to let the people speak?
The member for Gorton has been warned twice. It's his final warning. The member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Trade and Investment. Will the minister update the House on how key stakeholders have received our landmark trade deal with China, and what risks are there to this agreement?
I call the Minister for Trade and Investment.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. His extensive commercial experience makes him very well placed to judge the strength of this agreement. Mr Speaker, about 3 weeks ago I went to China and I took 35 Australian CEOs to explore the opportunities that would come to Australia under this China Free Trade Export Agreement. And I've got to say, I was really struck by the remarkable sense of anticipation, not just amongst the 35 CEOs that I took, but among all the business people that I ran into, interacted with, when in China for a few days. And it brought home to me the great breadth and depth of this agreement, and that mood is consistent with the view expressed today from respected businessman Graham Bradley, who said, and I quote, "Scorning the FTA would forego huge market access benefits that have so much to offer Australia in so many sectors, including agriculture, value-added food products and high-value services." Mr Speaker, I've been asked what risks there are to this agreement. Yesterday I dealt with the blatant untruths about labour market testing. Today I want to address the appalling scare campaign by the likes of the ETU and those opposite about the skills assessment of Chinese electricians. The disgraceful advertisements and robocalls are claiming lives will be lost and houses will burn down because of the China Free Trade Agreement. Mr Speaker, this is grubby politics. Those opposite should be ashamed of this nonsense. And robocalls and ads that are frightening seniors in our community. The truth is, under the China Free Trade deal, electricians and other skilled workers from China will be subjected to the exact same skills verification process as visa applicants from 150 other countries, whether it's Japan, whether it's Korea, Poland, Chile, Germany, Singapore, the UK, the US or Somalia. The same treatment you'd think we could give to the biggest trading partner that we've got as we give to Somalia. Mr Speaker, there are a raft of requirements that are necessary, skills, qualifications and experience that have to be presented by these Chinese, the potential Chinese entrants who are coming here on a temporary basis. The identity, work history, professional education, qualifications, professional registration, licensing, previous employers, English language proficiency and more, and they have to register with each state and territory. Mr Speaker, this is another major untruth.
The member for Blaxland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has previously said, quote, "Few are so publicly humiliated as a poleaxed Prime Minister." Is the Prime Minister finally satisfied that after all these years he has poleaxed and humiliated the member for Warringah?
The Leader of the House.
Well, Mr Speaker, clearly that question is not in order and should be ruled out of order.
The member for Blaxland, that question is not in order. It doesn't relate to the Prime Minister's responsibilities. No, the member for Watson will cease interjecting. The member for Isaacs is warned. The member for Wills is warned. The member for McEwen can leave under 94A. He can leave immediately under 94A. The member for Blaxland has an opportunity to rephrase the question to relate it to the Prime Minister's responsibilities. If he can't do that, I'm going to call the next question from the other side.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has previously said, quote, "Few are so publicly humiliated as a poleaxed Prime Minister." Prime Minister, why did you poleaxe the member for Warringah?
Leader of the House will resume his seat. I'm calling the next question. I'm calling the member for Dobell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education and Training. Will the Minister inform the House of the benefits to the international education sector of the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement? How does this agreement help boost jobs and growth across the economy?
I call the Minister for Education.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Dobell for her question. And I know that the member for
will leave under
Dobell—
94A.
Yes, you. I know the member for Dobell, like most members on this side of the House, is keenly interested in growing the international education sector even further than it has grown in the last 2 years under this government, growing from about $15.5 billion to over $18 billion in just 2 years, a 14% increase in enrolments in just 12 months. And we've done it because this government has brought a laser-like focus onto the management of international education. Things like, for example, the streamlined visa processing arrangements, but also the new Coordinating Council on International Education, which for the first time has brought together those ministers in the government who have responsibility for international education, whether it's the Minister for Industry, the Minister for Vocational Education and Training, the Assistant Minister for Immigration, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Minister for Trade and Investment and myself. We are coordinating the government's response because there is tremendous opportunity in the modern Australian economy to grow international education using our very high-quality reputation around the world for higher education. And the Chinese-Australia Free Trade Agreement, sometimes called the CHAFTA, is a new opportunity to do that even more by opening the markets through the good work of the Minister for Trade and Investment, by opening the Chinese market even more. The Chinese-Australia Free Trade Agreement clears away a number of obstacles for private providers of higher education and the university sector to get into the Chinese market and bring more international students here, but also establish more joint ventures and arrangements in China to use the best of the Chinese institutions and the best of the Australian institutions to improve the skill sets of both Chinese young people and Australian young people. So I'm very pleased that the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement has a large services component. And I'm also pleased that the Trade and Investment Minister is working on the India Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. I met with Prime Minister Modi when I was in India recently and talked specifically about this issue because India is our second largest market, and there are great opportunities through free trade to grow international education even further. It is one of the great success stories of the last 2 years, and it hasn't been achieved by accident, Mr Speaker. It's been achieved by sensible planning, coordination of government policy, an open-mind international education, a welcoming approach, and things like making visa arrangements easier and collaborations easier, which is good for jobs and good for growth in the economy. It is the future of the Australian economy, and I'm very pleased to have had oversight of it.
Call the member for McMahon.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports that the Prime Minister has made a captain's call to support an effects test and to put the National Party in charge of water policy as part of a new dirty deal with the National Party. Is this what traditional cabinet government and making decisions in a thoughtful and considered manner looks like?
The Leader of the House on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, I hate to interrupt the flow of question time, but today the opposition has made the same mistake again and again of not making their questions fit within the standing orders. Now, the Prime Minister is more than happy to answer questions on a whole range of issues, but he can't answer questions on hypothetical matter. He's not required to answer questions about internal party matters or party matters, and this question goes to internal party matters and hypothetical matters and things that haven't even yet been reported in the press, and therefore the question is out of order and cannot be rewritten.
I'm not going to call the member for McMahon until those on my left cease interjecting. The member for McMahon.
On the point of order, Mr Speaker, questions go to ministers in the area of their responsibility. There is only one person in this House responsible for ministerial appointments, and he sits in that chair. He's the only person to whom that question can be asked.
The Leader of the House.
But, Mr Speaker, one of the reasons this question is hypothetical is because the current ministerial arrangements are all entirely in place until they are changed by some potential reshuffle down the track. So the asking about ministerial arrangements that haven't even yet been canvassed is obviously hypothetical. Now, the opposition want to ask a question about a specific matter within the responsibilities of the Prime Minister. I'm sure he'll deal with it. But this is not such a question, and therefore it should be ruled out of order.
The member for Adelaide is warned. The member for Watson.
Thank you very much. The matter that the question refers to has been reported, is public. Apparently the Leader of the House is unaware of it, but apparently is a full agreement between the new Leader of the Liberal Party and the National Party, and goes to the machinery of government for which the Prime Minister is responsible.
Well, I'll say to the member for— no, the Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The member for Bendigo will cease interjecting. The question, as originally framed, didn't quote from anything. It made an assertion, and it was hypothetical. Once again, the member for Watson has sought to clarify that. If the question is rephrased asking about a report, it would be in order, and if you're not in a position to do that now, I'll go to the next question and come back. If you're positioned to rephrase it now.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Has the Prime Minister done a deal with the National Party to give the National Party responsibility for water policy?
No, that's out of order. It just it didn't refer to a. Yes, I just made the point. I'm going to give it. The members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Lyne will resume his seat. Member for Watson, as I said, if he made the point, it was referring to a report. If the question is rephrased, I'm going to give one more time on a tolerant kind of chair. If it was the member for Herbert is warned. The member for McMahon will resume his seat. I just don't want I want the member for McMahon to hear my full ruling. My ruling was based on the point of order from the member for Watson. The member for Watson, Leader of the House, will cease interjecting. The member for Riverina will cease interjecting. The member for McMahon has the call.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. I refer to reports on ABC Rural at 3:32 p.m. today that the Prime Minister has done a deal with a National Party to introduce an effects test and give the National Party responsibility for water policy. Are these reports accurate?
I call the Prime Minister.
Right, well,
the Leader of the House will cease interjecting.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, your patience with the opposition as they try to frame an acceptable question is really admirable. The honourable member will be well aware that any decision about amending the Consumer and Competition Act, the so-called relating to the so-called effects test, will be a decision of the Cabinet. That is not a decision that is made by me as Prime Minister. It would be a decision, and would be a decision by the Cabinet. In terms of machinery of government, which the honourable member is right, is a responsibility of the Prime Minister. Ministerial arrangements will be reviewed and announced later in the week or early next week.
Call the member for Lyne.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister explain to the House the benefits to the health sector of the landmark export agreement to China? And what is the government doing to improve the health of all of Australians?
I call the Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm delighted to take a question from the member for Lyne about the China Free Trade Agreement and the health of all Australians. And as we've heard from the Minister for Trade, this export agreement opens up opportunities for all Australians, but in particular Australians in the health sector, something you would think Labor would be interested in, as there are so many people in the health sector that look to the Labor Party for leadership and at the moment are not finding any. The key thing, Mr Speaker, is the burgeoning of the middle class in China and their access and their desire for new models of healthcare, new private hospitals, new access to medicines, including complementary medicines, and all of those opportunities that are available to the Australian sector, the workers of small businesses, are here waiting for Labor's decision. So, if Labor has no plan on the China Free Trade Agreement, Mr Speaker, does Labor have a plan for health? Absolutely not. 2 years in, no vision, no policy, not one single idea. And you would think that Labor would support the sensible measures that the government is putting in place. And I just want to touch on those because they are important. We are looking at reforms to health that focus on the patient. Against the background and the context of a landmark health and hospitals agreement between the Commonwealth and the states that recognises that if we work cooperatively together and pool our resources, we can avoid about $7 billion of waste in avoidable hospital admissions. We can look after patients at the primary care end of the spectrum before they come to hospital, and we can recognise that what Australians want is a system that looks after their entire journey, that doesn't allow the clunkiness of different funding models to get in the way. When you contrast our approach, which includes new models of primary care, enrolment, funding for chronic and complex care design, a review and a rewrite of the MBS, the first in a generation, because it no longer reflects clinical contemporary practice. Our e-health record, which is going to revamp Labor's failed electronic health record. And when you contrast that with Labor's year of completely no ideas, absolutely no ideas in health, and as the member for Ballarat often says, look at our record. So unfortunately we've had to refer to Labor's record. The epic fail of the GP super clinic, the undermining of medical research in this country, the attack on the Medicare safety net when Julia Gillard said, oh, that's just for rich people, the attack on the—
The Minister will resume her seat. The member for Ballarat on a point of order. Point of order.
Point of order on relevance. In order to be relevant, the Minister needs to say—
The Minister for Health. The Minister for Health has the call. The member for Ballarat will resume her seat or she will leave. The Minister for Health.
Mr Speaker, the member for Ballarat's comment, with relevance to her own comment, is that the opposition would be kidding itself if it didn't recognise that there were challenges and there is no area that is going to be exempt from cuts.
The Minister for Health's time has expired. I call the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
Well done.